When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the whole world knew it. It was a devastating raid, one which Americans rightfully commemorate every year. Australians commemorate Gallipoli, our part in the war on foreign soil. And yet the first ever attack on our own Australian soil is an event largely unknown and unrecognized. But then most people would probably say, well, not much happened anyway. Maybe a couple of bombs were dropped up north, but nothing major. The fact is that 2 months after Pearl Harbor, the same elite Japanese task force unleashed its might upon Darwin, twice in the one day. 8 ships were sunk, 9 American fighters were shot down, the RAAF base was obliterated, and at least 243 people were killed. Few Australians are aware of how bad things really were. Even history books place far more importance on our role in the war overseas, with scant attention to the war here, in our own country. Why? Well, the simple answer is that we weren't supposed to know. The facts were covered up and withheld from us right from the very first day. This is a Melbourne newspaper of February the 20th, 1942, reporting the Darwin raids with the deaths of 15 people and 24 wounded. These figures, released by the government to the press, paled alongside the enormous casualty lists of other theaters of war. So the facts of Darwin were lost. And nothing was done to redress the situation, to bring due recognition to those who had lost their lives. Now, it seems there were 2 reasons for this. Firstly, the government decided Australians would panic if they knew the severity of the situation. And secondly, because the government was embarrassed. Embarrassed by the reports coming from Darwin. Reports of gross official incompetence, mass desertion by the troops, civilian panic, and uncontrolled looting. If these reports are true, then perhaps Darwin 1942 is best forgotten. Perhaps it really is Australia's greatest shame.
Oh, yes, a shame, all right.
It was a disaster. It was a shameful disaster.
I don't think shame is strong enough.
Nobody wanted to stay in Darwin. It was rather a shameful thing, really.
I think it's a shame, certainly, on the show Australia, if the government thought that Australians would be too frightened to know the truth.
It is a shame, dreadful shame.
And it's certainly a shame that the state of unpreparedness was so great.
Strange, isn't it? That the first time you hear anything about Australians under attack on their own soil, it's associated with the word shame. Well, that's the way it's been described by many commentators over the years. But one thing is certain. The real shame is that we, the Australian public, have never really been told what happened in Darwin. So tonight, it's our intention to look at the main aspects of Darwin and try to unravel the truth, so that we can all make our own decision on how best to describe Darwin 1942. Physically, Darwin is closer to Indonesia than its own capital in Canberra. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese moved quickly through Southeast Asia. The 15th of February saw the fall of Singapore, and New Guinea was under attack. Darwin was right in the middle of the war zone. They were expecting trouble, but not so soon. And certainly were not anticipating the might with which the Japanese would strike.
The first 2 raids were very severe indeed, carried out by 2 of the 3 Japanese task forces that had attacked Pearl Harbor. And that was the great problem of the day, that no one expected a raid of that size with 188 aircraft. It was, by any standards, a very heavy attack.
There were 188 Japanese airplanes, because the Japanese always went in for overkill. Always. They would turn on a force 2 or 3 times the size that was warranted for the target. partly to make sure there were no mistakes, partly because they knew that it was disastrous for morale of people being attacked to have this huge force coming.
In Commander Fakila's words, they used a sledgehammer to crack an egg in the case of Darwin.
Darwin in the 1940s was really only a small country town. Prior to the evacuation that started after Pearl Harbor, Darwin's population was only around 5,000. By February the 19th, there were still 2,000 civilians left, including 63 women. On that day, 45 ships huddled closely together in the harbor with virtually no air defense. The RAF had only 5 Wirraways and 9 Hudson bombers in Darwin. It was an unprotected, unsuspecting, small country town.
At Smoko, 10 o'clock in the morning, sitting in our joinery shop behind the contractor's office, and the noise of aircraft approaching, and walked outside with a mug of tea in my hand, looked up in the sky, and there was a perfect formation of aircraft, a large number of aircraft, flying in arrow formation, 3 groups of 3 to form the arrow.
We heard this hum of aircraft, and we thought that you know, we were being reinforced because we didn't have much as far as aeroplanes up here. We had seen Wirraways flying around the place, but nothing much else. And so we all went out on the front veranda and looked up, and we saw this formation of aircraft coming over. They were maintaining very good formation and looked quite spectacular.
It was an absolute gorgeous morning, sunlight streaming straight in. They were coming in against the sun.
And we looked, and there they were coming out of the sun, hundreds of them. As I said earlier, a beautiful sight, there's no doubt about it.
We were only looking at them for half a minute perhaps, and then we saw some little white puffballs, like cotton wool, appear in front of them, and realised immediately that must have been ACACs, the shells bursting in front of them.
But suddenly I saw the bomb doors open. You could distinctly see the bomb doors open.
And then we noticed what looked like little silver darts coming out of the bottom of the aeroplane. And it took us a few seconds, I suppose, to realise, my God, they're not ours, you know.
I can remember standing on the ship and looking towards Darwin itself, towards the wharf, when suddenly I saw the sea apparently just rise up. The first bomb fell near the wharf.
Right, say, bloody Jack, let's get out of here.
I and this lieutenant shot away with a staff car from the wharf straight up the hill to go back to Larrakia Barrack. And we couldn't hardly move. Amblin was running out, in and out, and the Japanese come down with 0 machine gun. And oh, suddenly the bomb let go, they chopped the wharf in half. And then they into it in on the wharf there.
They just picked off the ships at will. They had no opposition, the Japanese, and they had sitting shots.
I could see the Perry, and she seemed to be down by the stern, and I could see the British motorists had copped it, and the Neptuna was on fire.
The Neptuna got over 2,000 ton of depth charge in it. And when she went off, she shook the whole of Darwin.
Probably 1,000 foot high, this huge roiling of smoke and heat. The pieces of that ship were landed, half a mile away, I suppose.
The Neptuna was alongside the pier on the outside berth, and she had a corvette alongside of her, and on the inside berth a ship called the Barossa, and they were all caught.
a horrible sight to see them going down, the propellers stuck up out of the water. There was boats burning everywhere. The sea itself was burning. There was oil everywhere. There was people floating around in the harbour. A lot of them would have made it to shore, except that the oil on the water was alight, and they were burnt to death before they got to shore. And all you could do was rake up the bodies.
Jokers was coming up there, all black, with this oil, you know, all over them, black. And some burnt to, unrecognised. We carry some of them from the beach, bring them up and put them in the stretcher and take them to hospital. A lot of them died.
No doubt the primary objective of that first raid was to attack the ships in the harbour. And the results were devastating. 8 ships were sunk and many damaged. Officially, 200 men were killed. Little wonder with 45 ships huddled so closely together. But whilst this onslaught continued, the arc of their attack took the Japanese raiders right across the town.
And the dive bombers were breaking off to the harbour and to the RAF. And then the others and Zeros were coming over the top, straight in.
We were still not knowing what we hadn't been advised, that the likelihood of Japs coming, nobody said anything. Some of the planes just flew over the town firing as they went past. A number of bullets landed quite close to us, thudding into trees and the ground. And each time that happened, we did a little scurry, looking for shelter.
A Zero did come down the main street straight, and you could see the fanatical grin on his face. He was that low.
I looked round and there was a Zero zooming up, I think it's called Smith Street. I can still remember, I just pulled my hat over my head thinking that was going to protect me. And off the bombs went, and of course I was splattered with this clay and blue metal and God knows what.
A number of fighters had dropped small bombs and strafed all the buildings and caused lots of fires amongst fuel dumps and bitumen dumps, that sort of thing. There was many fires burning the town area.
Of the houses between us and the post office, and right then down towards the walls, got a number of direct hits.
There was bombs coming down all around the place, and I naturally didn't realise that I was running into it. I thought I was running away from it, you know. When I was in front of the post office, right on top of the cliff, another bomb landed, and that blew me over the cliff.
The post office scored a direct hit, and they were all killed. There were 9 people, including Postmaster Hurdle there, who were all found in various stages of mutilation around the place.
And as we got them out, they were all distorted with the explosion of the bombs. And one girl, she had her brains hanging out the back of her head where her short black hair was. And one arm was twisted right round and all ripped. Lumps of skin ripped off their buttocks. And it's a strange thing with a bomb. It seems to blow something away and suck other things in, because their clothing was up on the branches of a tree about 50 or 60 yards away. The first thing that crossed my mind, my wife was down in Melbourne at the time, and I had a little girl about 3, Lois, and I thought, my God, I hope I never see my wife and daughter like this.
Officially, 14 civilians were killed in the town area. But beyond the town was another major target, the RAF base. And here the Japanese found an unexpected bonus, because added to the normal air fleet of 5 Wirraways and 9 Hudson bombers was a visiting squadron of American P-40 Kitty Hawks. 10 planes returning from Kupang. 5 had landed, and the other 5 were still in the air when the Japanese attacked.
Major Pell, who was in command, took his 11 fighters down to a low level, and then he ordered Lieutenant Ostrike, who was in command of one flight, to take his flight of 5 and go up to 8,000 feet and there patrol, while he refueled with the other 5 pilots. And they had just landed and got out of their aircraft when the attack hit.
Perez will probably go down as the unknown soldier. His radio apparently was out of action, and he was the first shot down, we believe. There were 3 others killed in the ensuing battle.
All the others, all very inexperienced pilots, were shot down without firing a shot. Strike was the only man to down any Japanese planes from the air that day. He lurked in the cloud for a while and he came out and attacked 2 Val dive bombers and shot them both down. And when he landed after the raid, his was the only P-40 left in one piece.
There were 3 others killed. Lieutenant Hughes was one. He was killed taking off with Captain Pell. Captain Pell just managed to get into the air, and he had to bail out at 80 feet when his aircraft was hit. He landed on the actual airstrip itself, and they thought he was dead after he'd parachuted down because his parachute didn't open properly. And he moved, and apparently the Japanese saw that, and they strafed him and they killed him. Lieutenant Glover was quite interesting actually, because he was protecting Lieutenant Rice, I believe. He was being strafed in his parachute, and Glover was flying around his chute trying to protect him from the attacking Zeros and other Japanese aircraft. His aircraft was hit and it developed a spin, and the people on the ground apparently thought he was just going to dive straight into the ground, but he seemed to get out of it at the last minute and flattened out and just hit the airstrip, and the aircraft virtually disintegrated. But he walked out of that, walked for some way before he collapsed in a heap, probably from shock, and one of the Australian soldiers from the trenches galloped out and picked him up and rescued him.
A sledgehammer to crack an egg. A fairly apt description. And even more so when you consider that there were 2 raids on Darwin that day. 2 hours later, another 54 land-based bombers came back to concentrate on what was left of the RAF base. So it certainly was an overkill. As a result of that first day of raids, the death toll was officially 243. But like so much of what is officially reported about that day in Darwin, the death toll is disputed. No one really knows how many were killed.
Oh, I couldn't tell you how many killed there. There's a good lot.
Well, no one really realised and believed how many had gone. And it was more than 250.
I handled that many. I know there was a lot more than that.
We all thought there were a lot more than that. But unless you could produce the body, they didn't count them. But I'm sure there's a lot more. There's some talk that there's up to 1,000 or more that were killed.
1,000 deaths, or even the official toll of 243. Either way, this is still the greatest single disaster in Australia's history, and yet it has remained virtually ignored all these years. What possible reason could there be for this cover-up, this neglect? Well, now we have an understanding of the size of the attack and its results. Let us start to ask some questions. Was Darwin prepared for such a raid? If you think back to what our people were saying earlier about the Japanese arriving, you may recall not one of them mentioned an air raid siren.
I did hear an air raid siren. It did go, but it was far too late, of course, but it did go.
After they'd gone over the top of us, the siren went.
Virtually, I was not conscious of any air raid siren until the bombs dropped.
I think the air raid siren started not long after the bombs landed. Yeah. Yes.
No sirens until after the bombs dropped. But warnings were given, at least 35 minutes before the raid. But they went unheeded. Why? Well, this, along with other allegations of incompetence and neglect, caused the government of the day to establish a Royal Commission of Inquiry to investigate events resulting from that first day of raids in Darwin. The appointed commissioner was Mr. Justice Lowe from Melbourne, assisted by a Melbourne King's Counsel, Mr. John Barry, and by Mr. Harold Alderman, a lawyer from Adelaide. The level of the government's concern was such that this commission was set up extremely quickly. Within 2 weeks of the first raid, they'd been whisked up to Darwin, and here were holding court amidst the turmoil of continuing air raids.
It's particularly valuable evidence because Lowe guaranteed to all the witnesses that none of it would ever become public, and thus they spoke pretty freely. It was made public eventually in 1978.
Today it is, of course, declassified, and a very reliable means of approaching the truth about many aspects of Darwin. Throughout this program, we will be using segments from that Royal Commission, and I would like to stress that the material in our reenactments is not scripted in any way. It is taken verbatim from the transcripts of that commission. Well, one of the first things they wanted to know was why there was a delay in the communication of any warnings.
Well, there was no delay in the communication. The communication was expeditiously handled between Bathurst Island 8SE and VID Darwin Radio, and Kernock phoned it through to RAF operations in a matter of seconds. There was no delay in communication. It was merely that the RAF didn't act on it.
Lockwood and Hall and myself have all made attempts to unravel the chain of events that led to that not being passed on. Without a lot of success, it does appear to be just plain incompetence and a belief that it couldn't happen.
When that first raid stopped, I ran down to the radio station. We weren't that far away, and I found Lou Kernock, the officer in charge there, and the first thing I saw on the table was in the official log was the message from Bathurst Island from Father McGrath, transmitted at 9:35.
8SE to VID, urgent message, over.
VID to 8SC, receiving you loud and clear, over.
Big flight of planes passing over, going south, very high, over.
VID to 8SC.
What's on Bathurst Island? Any station?
The time is there, 9:37.
What does 9:37 represent?
At the time this message was passed to RAF operations.
Did you speak to any person at RAF operations?
Most decidedly.
Who was that person?
Oh, I don't know. Some officer on duty in RAF operations.
Right. Did you receive a message from the Darwin radio?
Yes.
And do you know what time you received that message?
Approximately 20 minutes to 10.
And as soon as you got the message, what did you do?
I reported it to the officers in the room.
Did any discussion take place as to its meaning or effect?
Well, that morning, I think approximately 10 P-40s had been sent to Kopang. They'd gone 10 or 12 minutes. But owing to a message from Kopang that the weather was deteriorating, a message was sent ordering them to return. The discussion was then whether the formation flying southwards was the formation of P-40s.
Right, you can dispatch those. Sir, we just received this from VID. Urgent message from Bathurst Island. I think it's probably the Kitty Hawks.
Yes, sir.
What line of departure or exit did the Kitty Hawks take on the left? West. Sir, in my opinion, if the P-40s were going west at 230 knots, they wouldn't be coming back past Bathurst Island.
I'll go to the station commander.
He said we'd better inform the station commander at once. He then went downstairs and reported the station commander.
Personally?
Yes.
There was no question of picking up a telephone.
He personally did it himself.
The message was received by the person in the operations room. Did he shout out?
No, he rang me on the telephone.
From where?
From his office to mine.
I went immediately downstairs to the commanding officer.
You went and spoke to him?
Yes, immediately.
No, he rang me on the telephone.
I discussed it with him in his office. I informed him that a large force had been observed.
Was there a discussion about this? Was it not pointed out that those planes took off in the west and could not possibly, in that time, be returning south over Bathurst?
I did not discuss that with anyone.
There was no discussion about that in the operations room either?
No. I plotted the position where they would have been, and it more or less corresponded with the report sent from Bathurst. So I conveyed the information to the CO. At the same time, I informed him that a large force had been observed.
Come in.
Excuse me, sir. Message from Bathurst Island. I thought you should be informed.
Well, what do you make of it?
Well, it could be the P-40s. We had to recall them due to bad weather.
It is still Father McGrath up there, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Is it a possibility that you or any of your staff thought it was a false alarm? That the aircraft that were approaching were the P-40s returning?
That did not occur to me.
Do you know if it did occur to any of your officers?
Not at the time.
When Wing Commander Griffith came up, was there a discussion?
I discussed it with him in his office.
Did he go up to the operations room?
Yes, about 5 minutes later. Should I sound the air raid alarm in case it's not the P-40s?
No, that's not necessary.
Can you understand him not wanting to sound the alarm if he didn't consider these planes might be the P-40s returning?
No. That's not one of ours. They're Japanese.
Sounds the alarm. But what I am sure of is that the raid commenced at 8 minutes past 10. The exact time we sounded the alarm and the signal came through would be simultaneous, a little before 10.
And the time is there, 9:37.
Now that was criminal. If we had received, or the services had acted, or somebody had acted, there's no question about it, there would be a different story.
Really, 20 minutes only elapsed between 20 to 10 and 10 o'clock. But those 20 minutes were absolutely critical because the ships could have got up steam and could have been moving around instead of all being tied there like sitting ducks. Personnel could have taken cover. All sorts of things could have happened in 20 minutes.
It could have made a lot of difference. It would have been time enough, for instance, to get the wharfies off the wharf and could have saved 22 lives there for a start.
Oh, of course. For instance, they would have been able to disperse the shipping. The shipping would have been, at least get up steam and move. As it was, they were all there like sitting ducks, just tied up to their buoys.
The aircraft could have got off the ground. They would have been in the air on their way south if they couldn't fight. And the ships in the harbour could have been on their way out of the harbour.
Particularly Peary, which went down with 80 men, might have had enough time to up anchor and get underway, and with their high speed she could well have escaped, as a very similar vessel, William B. Preston in harbour did, in fact.
Do you have a view as a responsible Darwin citizen whether the utilisation of this message that you got earlier could have avoided loss of life?
Yes, I considered our work was wasted. If the warning had been taken up the moment it was received, quite a lot of steps could have been taken. The wharf labourers could have got away, the ship steamed up and avoided the bombs. It's likely that a lot of people could have got into the trenches, but they did not. All of the guns should have been manned.
You consider that as a result of the failure to take proper notice and make proper use of this message, that Darwin was caught unawares to the extent that it need not have been?
Yes.
As a result of that, the greater loss of life might have been minimized?
The men were sheep, absolute sheep. They didn't know where to go. It was a matter for shame, the number of officers, NCOs and airmen who showed unadulterated funk, clearing off into the bush, remaining in the bush.
Severe and serious accusations delivered by Pilot Officer Richard Saxton concerning the behavior of RAF personnel after the raids. Funk, a word not used much today, then had a strong meaning of fear and panic, or as the dictionary describes, a funk hole, a trench or dugout used as a pretext for evading military service. Evasion of duty is a serious enough accusation for any serviceman, but desertion in the face of an enemy can normally only be described as the ultimate act of cowardice. However, when you have a case of mass desertion of almost an entire Air Force base, it suggests that cowardice is perhaps not the only reason, and therefore we should look further. For this was the case in Darwin on that fateful day. Literally hundreds of Australian airmen ran away, displaying, as Saxton so aptly said, unadulterated funk.
It's a hard thing to say that they disobeyed orders. I know, I believe that the Air Force were told to look after themselves and like take shelter, but they took more than shelter, they took off.
I went to the Air Force immediately after the raid. There wasn't a soul there.
They turned up in Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane, Alice Springs, Sydney.
When they were told after the first raid, after the second raid rather, on the Air Force station, to assemble half a mile down the Batcher Road and half a mile into the bush, just kept going. And 2 days later, there's still 258 of them missing.
The immediate station commander of the Royal Australian Air Force in Darwin at the time was a solicitor from Sydney, a man called Sturt Griffith. Very much of the blame for what happened in Darwin must be laid squarely in Griffith's lap. Whatever his own qualities may have been, the fact that the Air Force ran away in huge numbers and displayed really almost unprecedented cowardice in many cases has got to be laid fairly and squarely on Griffith's lap. He was, after all, the buck stopped with Griffith. He was the commander there. Sherger himself said afterwards that the fault for what happened, what Paul Hasluck called Australia's Day of National Shame, lay with the Australian Air Force officers and not with the men.
Do you care to express an opinion, under the circumstances of the raid, of the conduct of Wing Commander Griffith?
He, in common with the rest of us, was very badly shaken, but he did not, in my opinion, exercise the best judgment in controlling and directing his station.
Do you mean he did not have sufficient mental composure to deal with the situation, or what?
I think that he was rattled. He was too unsettled to exercise cool judgment.
And he was quite appalled, and the evidence that he gave at the Royal Commission afterwards was probably the most damning of all, because his own reputation and his own standing were quite impeccable.
Morale at the station did not seem to me to be badly shaken. I took a tour on foot and spoke to several airmen. While they were a little bit dazed, there was no sign of any panic after the raid. Afterwards, I went back to ACH, and the station commander informed me that it was his intention to feed the men at a point half a mile off the road and a half a mile from the eastern end of the aerodrome. After about 2 hours, it became apparent that practically every man on the station had left it.
That leaving was, in one sense at least, an unauthorized leaving?
Yes. It could be that the commander's orders were misinterpreted or misunderstood. But it is my opinion that the relative inexperience of the station commander led to what could be viewed as a rapid exodus of personnel from the station. And what started out as an endeavor to systematically feed men in safety became, as it was passed from mouth to mouth, go to the bush. And men simply went everywhere. I'm quite convinced that it was a lack of direction by the officers and not the fault of the men themselves.
But the men should gather in order to be fed at a point half a mile further down the road from the aerodrome and half a mile into the bush.
Sir.
Now, it was a pretty unspecific, stupid, vague message to start with. When you give a message like that to a mob of people who are already frightened, you can really imagine what happened. And so what happened was that initially about 1,000 Australian airmen ran away.
By any word of mouth order, unless it be given to an assembled body of men, will always be misconstrued. And I believe that the Air Force were unduly criticised.
There was obviously a mistaken order that went out, and everyone just thought they were doing what they were supposed to do. They were taking cover somewhere else.
As the order went down, it's like a rumour. It got worse and worse and worse. Now, get your way to Adelaide.
Half a mile further down the road from the aerodrome and half a mile into the bush.
Having heard the evidence of Wing Commander Griffith read out to you, what do you say about it?
Frankly, I didn't think much of it.
Wing Commander Griffith places the blame for the first stampede on you because you did not handle the situation properly.
Doesn't see that.
You're not bound to make a defense of it, but you would probably like to. And this is as good a place for a defense as any.
Well, I think I can leave it to the troops. You can call the troops as witnesses. They'll give you an idea of what my instructions were, whether to go to bachelor or daily waters, or to have a feed and go back to camp.
Do you deny completely that anything you did was in any way responsible for the dispersion of those troops in an unauthorized fashion?
I do, most emphatically.
Do you deny that you transmitted any order other than the order that was actually given to you?
If it was an order.
Or instruction?
Or instruction. The movement had already begun when it was passed on to me.
In other words?
There was a decentralization of troops.
Is that a nice way of saying that the troops had begun to take it into their own hands?
No, but the truth is that the men got orders from somewhere.
I do not believe that the exodus is ascribable to Swan. I have known Swan for a long time. I also have personal experience of his conduct and demeanor during the air raids. He and 2 or 3 other officers set the very highest personal example during those raids.
Hey, you men, come back here! Get that vehicle in here! Get the bloody ammunition off from the hole on the road!
And of course you had the senior NCOs, the non-commissioned officers, sergeants, flight sergeants, warrant officers, who were really, always have been classed as a backbone of the service. They were the experienced guys, they were the level-headed ones, they had the years of training behind them, the years of service. So really they did shine. And of course on the other side you had the younger staff officer who had never seen war, who really in those days was probably this, the epitome of the Pakistan syndrome we had.
They had no experience of how to behave in the face of an enemy attack like that.
You see, they plastered the RAF in the morning, gave a hell out of it. Then they came back at dinner time, bombed Darwin again a second time.
In the second raid, which was a very highly concentrated raid, completely on the RAF, an area of about 800 by 400 metres, the rain of bombs was just quite frightening and certainly very deafening.
They were badly knocked about, and in particular the second raid, the 54 bombers, I think they concentrated on the RAF and just finished them off completely. They had workshops, hospitals, hangars and everything else and all. They were completely destroyed. They had
I'd got it pretty heavily, right down all the roadways and the buildings and everything else. And they were very, very young, the lads. Later on, you had to forgive them, I suppose.
You can't blame them for being terrified. It was a very terrifying situation.
I heard the officers say, we think we should evacuate, we should get out of here. Well, they'd never experienced anything so terrifying in their lives. I heard a sergeant there, whimpering. He was 23 years of age, too young to stand it. His nerves had gone.
The system, particularly the Air Force's system, was inherently flawed. It had gone up in a very short time from 5,000 to about 20,000 personnel, and a lot of these were specialist technicians. Now, whereas in the Army and in the Navy, they also had their technicians, they believed firmly that a man should be first of all a soldier and a sailor, and secondly a technician. In the Air Force, this wasn't the case at all. In the Air Force, it was still their technical skills that they'd been recruited for. And many of these people really effectively were just civilian technicians, untrained in military ways, who'd been put into uniform. And so their response was the response of civilians in the face of an enemy coming at them rather than of servicemen.
The results may have been very serious. Supposing the enemy to have come by parachute and landed on the station, could there have been any effective defense by those who were left?
No effective defense whatever. There were a large number of men to whom I spoke on the 20th. They had taken to the bush because they expected a Japanese landing. They themselves were unarmed. Those who were armed remarked, "We don't know how to use them, and we're not going to stay here to be massacred."
What everybody knew, because the propaganda was so effective, was the atrocities that the Japanese always performed, or they were told the Japanese performed, whenever they found civilians. So the women expected to be raped, the men expected to have their heads chopped off. So there was an atmosphere of fear.
One does not know the importance that the Japanese would attach to this particular objective, though I believe that he would attach fairly high importance to it. If he could get a foot here with long-range aircraft, he could strike down our lines of communication to the south and separate us. He could then spread throughout Australia. There is nothing that he cannot strike at.
We were ill-equipped to deal with any situation such as a Japanese landing on the coast.
And you mightn't believe this, but they gave me a rifle, which is a .303 rifle, and 2 clips of cartridges. You know, there's 10 cartridges, 5 in a clip. I had 10 cartridges, and that's what I had to help defend Darwin in case there was an invasion.
The Japanese could have landed, you know, that day and taken Darwin without any difficulty.
Immediately after the raids, we were put on ground defence around the RAF, and because we only had 80 rifles, most of the men were issued with short angle iron pickets with which to defend the area.
100 Japanese armed with frying pans, they said, could have walked in and seized Darwin that day.
The Japanese could have landed a platoon almost anywhere on the Australian coast. And if they'd had, well, the first estimate by the combined American-Australian staffs was a division or less, even a brigade could have taken Northern Australia. And it probably could have, because of the weak state of preparedness.
No equipment, no experience, no training, and a very real fear of invasion. Understandable, but not excusable that so many RAF personnel ran from the front line. The Army's answer to the problem was to move the front line. They withdrew immediately, establishing their official headquarters 100 kilometers south of Darwin, leaving behind a few forward gunners and some very confused civilians.
The Army actually were conspicuous by their absence in the town.
At our station, to give you one idea, that we had 3 Army guards, and after the second raid of the first day, an Army truck pulled up, an Army captain just come and said, "Right, our lads, jump aboard." And we said, "How about us? What are you doing?" They said, "We're withdrawing to Adelaide River. That will be Advanced Army Headquarters." We said, "Who looks after us?" We're given 2 303 rifles, and that was it.
We were virtually in a no man's land.
In fact, they were sent down the track to Kumali Creek and leaving the remaining civilians in the Navy and the Fortress troops in the front line, as they saw it, with their headquarters. 100 kilometres down the track.
Marched through the town the next morning to the barracks that were occupied until the ship was repaired, and there wasn't a soul to be seen. The army had shot through, the Air Force had gone, and everybody.
The town did empty very quickly. You could walk into houses where the dinner plates were still on the table. Those sort of things happened.
The night of the raid, there was very, I'd say there probably wasn't, there wouldn't have been 100 civilians or 150 civilians perhaps left.
Well, they heard this Japanese going to land parachutes, so they're gone.
A lot of the people started to leave because some of the police were saying, get out of town, the Japs are landing. So it panicked, everybody started panicking. It rubbed off on the people, and then most of the people then started to leave.
We were told by one of the police, Sandy McNabb, he came round to us and he said that I've been ordered to tell you to get out of Darwin. Well, that was just a complete evacuation, get out of Darwin.
They told us to keep going and not to stop until we got to Adelaide, and because a black warning was imminent. Well, a black warning was an invasion warning.
I think the main thing is the panic. And I could easily understand that because Australia had never been attacked, had received any direct enemy attack, and nobody was prepared for it. And there was just a general panic.
This is the first time that anything like this had happened to anyone, and no one knew what their reactions were going to be. Now, I think in a normal population, you're going to have people who panic, you're going to have people who have a delayed shock, you're going to have people who don't really want to be part of it. Some people who are going to join in and be the organisers and the leaders to get things going. So you get a whole complete spectrum of human nature right through the area.
Oh, I think there was naturally a bit of panic from people that that hadn't experienced that sort of thing or never heard of it before, you know, and it wasn't just a little pot shot at Darwin, it was a very serious raid.
Probably there were some people who were scared stiff and ran like hell. I think they would have been in the majority. The shame was more on I feel, on the part of the army itself for not taking immediate control and getting the grip on the whole situation at once, you know.
And I think if we had the leaders that stay on, that panic wouldn't have happened. Now the panic started with the armed services and administrator. Now the administrator is the leader of the civilian community. He panicked, and then all the public servants, the heads of the different public, they all panicked, they left.
I feel enormous sympathy for those people who were denied the leadership that they had every right to expect when they were up there. The failure had to be, as Sherga said, at the top. The civilians, I mean, who on earth could blame? I mean, how could any civilian be blamed for running away? When he sees the servicemen running away, the military policemen looting, as I say, the administrator, the administration, the police, all of them failing him. And the prospect that any minute the Japanese, who they believed murdered and raped and chopped people's heads off, were just going to be coming over the horizon. Any civilian would run away in circumstances like that.
Well, I probably was looting myself in that all the houses were empty with people who ran away, and there was liquor there and there was food, and I was hungry and I like a drink, so I helped myself. I also helped myself to a truck.
Motor vehicles, of course, were requisitioned. They were needed. People who had individual petrol supplies. Food, of course, was requisitioned for the military. Anything that was usable was properly requisitioned, and this is fine. I mean, that's what one would expect.
The food situation looked as though it was going to be pretty grim. In fact, it was for at least the 3 months after that first raid.
Certainly, we helped ourselves to the food in the Darwin Hotel's cool store. All power had failed. Our ration system had broken down, so we removed the food and ate it.
And fortunately, a lot of the people left foul yards and that sort of thing behind when they had, so we got ourselves a bit of poultry and that sort of thing.
Requisition of essentials is acceptable in war, but looting is not. Looting is universally abhorred. It is taking advantage of another's tragedy, and it is recognized practice for looters to be shot in wartime. But no such action was taken, or any effort made to quell the enormous looting spree that occurred up there. Perhaps this was because the main offenders were the very people who should have been in control, the military police.
If ever there were villains in Darwin at the time of the raid, it was the military police. The enemy that the people in Darwin had to face wasn't, for all practical purposes, the Japanese, except for the bombing from the air. The enemy they had to face on the ground was primarily the Australian military police.
They called themselves the town major, came in and occupied that place, had an office there, and the Darwin became under martial law. I since learned that they had no authority to do that, but we all thought that they did, and they were going around, they were ordering everybody around, and they ran the town.
The army didn't make any official move until the 23rd of February, and didn't take over the whole area formally until the 26th.
One chap there who was, I think he was a major or something, the mad major we used to call him, he was always declaring that he was in charge of Darwin, and we didn't take much notice of him because he was drunk most of the time.
The military police, the provos, they had taken over the town. They'd completely told the local police where to go. Local police had no power at all, and the provos, they really went mad. They were pulling people out of vehicles, smashing their headlights if they had their headlights on of a night time.
They'd always been bad news, the military police. I mean, Wells, the judge up there, was utterly contemptuous of the quality of the military policemen who had been sent up to Darwin. They were always bad news. But as soon as the raid happened, they just went on a lawless, drunken, looting attack. They started off to keep crowd control over the Australians by firing over their heads innocent civilians who were just a bit frightened down at the railway station, who were just pushing a bit.
Right there, women on one side and men on the other. Get them over there. Hurry up! Hurry up, I said! Move it!
Arthur Onslow was there. He was even drunker than usual. He was pretty mad. As far as I could see, most of the rest of the Provo Corps were in a pretty bad state. Now, there was a train due to leave shortly afterwards, and at the time, the Army decided that no men were to leave Darwin. But they were old men, and some who had been wounded slightly, and some were sick. So we, an Army officer named Jackson and I, picked out some of the men and told the rest they were not allowed to go. During this time, the Provo Corps were firing over the heads of the crowd. The crowd was not giving any trouble at all. The Provo Corps said if a man stepped forward, they would shoot him. They were firing over the heads of the people, and then when cars came along, they would stop them and shoot at the lights. It was a disgraceful matter.
Did you regard the civilians as panic-stricken?
They were very frightened, but not panic-stricken.
They were not in such a condition as if they were about to mob the train?
No.
Is it a fact that the train pulled out only half full?
I couldn't say. But the train left before Jackson and I had finished drafting the people out. We were surprised to find out that the train had gone. That train went contrary to Jackson's instructions.
MacArthur Onslow particularly was singled out by Wells as being the worst of the offenders, who was and a major called Pye, and both of these men were subsequently court-martialed and convicted. But what the military police also had was they had a monopoly on looting.
With the Provos, I've seen them going into the shops, especially in Cameron Street, which is known as Chinatown. They went into the various shops and took things. and you couldn't question them or anything. They were the law unto themselves.
The biggest offenders amongst the army would be the ones that should have been protecting it was the Provo Corps. And I know that on quite a lot of occasions we caught them in the backs of shops and in houses and so forth, taking things out, loading it onto trucks and all this sort of business. And we were pretty powerless to stop it, really.
And I came home one day and I caught 3 provosts, military policemen. One was a major and one was ordinary ranks, 2 ordinary ranks. And at that time I was very fit. It was at the time when I was the welterweight champion of the Northern Territory, and I did have a rifle with me. I didn't do everything with my fists, but I made a mess of those 3 fellows. I tell you, they wouldn't want to do any looting anymore.
Chinatown was looted, and then later it was burnt down.
Well, they just burned all the furniture, clothing, material, everything that's in it. The Chinese goods, everything. They burned that place down. It was a Provo burned that.
They turned up in truckloads. They stole everything that they could move. They stole clothes, they stole furniture, they stole toys. They requisitioned ships which were going down to safety to take the stuff down. They stole pianos. The Beckstein grand piano out of Government House was looted.
And there seems to be a pretty well-organised racket which came to light when the ship Yo Chow reached Brisbane early in March. She'd been loading and unloading in Darwin. And a number of the Chinese crew were nabbed with things like washing machines and refrigerators, hundreds of them, and even cases of things like ladies' bloomers, for example, that they told the police there had been brought down in Australian Army trucks and loaded on to the ship in exchange for things like cigarettes and grog. So there was an organised racket as well.
Bands roamed the streets, broke into houses, stole furniture, refrigerators, anything that was left behind.
The locks were smashed and a lot of the furniture reappeared down in Sydney, courtesy of Her Majesty's government. This particular woman's sister was down in Sydney and her furniture was sitting in the Colonel's house down there after the war.
A RAF bloke told me he had my camper wood box, my wife's camper wood box. This was in Melbourne. I was in Melbourne in the army. And I said to him, well, thanks very much. And he said, no, I had a hell of a job to get out of Darwin.
Come on, Jack, what are you doing? Come on,
They organised lots of stuff in the houses and had it shipped out along with my wife's sewing machine. And they got hold of my wife and she told them and that this machine was in Brisbane, I think they found it.
And he said, there is a machine in Brisbane, a brand new machine. He said, if you can identify us, whatever in the machine. So I gave the description of everything in the machine. And the next thing we got a letter back. Everything that the detail I gave them was all in the machine, but they cannot let me have the machine because I didn't have the serial number. Now, who would take a serial number when they had to be evacuated from Darwin now? And we thought that the stuff that I lost was in Brisbane because I'd never seen any of our furniture. Everything was gone. And we got word that the place was bombed and everything gone. When we came back to the house was still standing as it is, but all the lock was broken.
It was the looting by the troops that really hurt more than what the bombing did.
After the raid, there's a good deal of controversy about Abbott, and mainly over 2 things. One was that he is alleged to have removed crockery and cutlery from Parliament, from Government House, during the 19th, immediately after the raids, and used police for that purpose. And the other is over an allegation that his maid, who had been in the concrete blockhouse with him and his wife and other staff during the raid, had a block of concrete fall on them when a bomb fell 10 metres away, and Abbott said she was killed instantly. It was alleged by Judge Wells and other people that she had not been killed instantly and had been crying out for help after the raid and was ignored.
You and another constable were detached to remove this crockery.
Yes, correct.
Was it known at the time there was a body of a half-caste girl there?
Yes, I knew that.
Was the administration building in such a condition that men were not prepared to remove that body?
We were quite prepared to do that.
Come on, I want all that glassware and all that silver out of there. Everything of value. And be careful, it's government property. Come on, get a move on.
Sir, excuse me. This body, sir. Shouldn't we get it out?
Don't be ridiculous, man. She's dead.
Sir, I'm afraid I don't...
Come on, just get on with it. We've got more important things to do.
Sergeant.
Carry on, Constable.
Come on, get a move on.
You mean to tell me that the bystanders saw you leave the woman there?
Yes, that is the position.
Did you offer any protest to Sergeant Littlejohn about the work on which you were engaged?
Yes.
What did he say?
He had his orders from the administrator.
It was loathsome, but entirely necessary. And as a matter of police discipline, you had to carry out orders.
Yes. As a matter of fact, it was next day when I was in charge of the men that we got the body out.
How long did it take you to remove that body once you'd started?
Half an hour.
Was it equally obvious the previous day as it was the next day that it would take half an hour?
Yes.
Well, I asked the administrator, did they get her out okay? And he said, she's still there as far as I know. And I said something to the administrator then, and which probably wasn't repeatable now, but I got the help from a couple of volunteers, chaps that had volunteered to help us, and we got some picks and a crowbar, and we went over and levered a big piece of cement that was lying above her, and we got her out. She wasn't injured at all physically, but she was very blue around the lips and the face, and my opinion was that she just suffocated there.
Were you one of the party to remove the body?
Yes.
Can you tell me the nature of any injury which she sustained?
The only injury I could see was a little scratch on the lip.
The body was uninjured except for a scratch?
Yes. To all appearances, she died from suffocation and strangulation.
Do you understand the seriousness of the position? That you might have given help to this woman and saved her life, but instead you were diverted from that to remove the china and crockery?
Yes.
Do you appreciate the seriousness of that?
Yes.
You have no doubt that it is true?
It is true.
But certainly if we'd have known early in the piece that there was a girl under there and there was any chance of her being alive, we'd have gone straight over and got her out, because it was only a matter of 100 yards from where we were treating the injured people that came up from the wharf.
The official version, to start with, was that Daisy Martin was dead, and that Abbott said, "Don't worry about moving her body. You leave her body there and get my wife's jewelry and clothes and possessions out. You know, she's not going to go anywhere," sort of thing. She'll stay under there. What came out of the Royal Commission afterwards was that Daisy Martin wasn't dead, and that for fully 20 minutes she was crying out to be rescued, and that all the people who were there did nothing. The people in the residence at the time knew that the half-caste was still crying out for someone to drag her out of the wreckage, and that carried on for about half an hour, 20 minutes.
There is a very grave accusation against the administrator there.
Yes. The policeman gave evidence on oath at the Royal Commission that she wasn't dead, that she was alive, and that Abbott knew it.
Well, I think Mr. Abbott would have been aware of her crying out, because he was there when he was in the same building when the bomb hit it.
Were you aware at any time after the raid that one of the half-caste maids on the staff was entombed in the wreckage?
Was dead.
When did you know she was dead?
About half an hour after the raid started.
How did you know she was dead?
Because she was covered by concrete and material from her limbs upwards. We had got one black boy out, and I could see that she must be dead. She did not move, and she had the appearance of being dead.
Did you hear her crying and whimpering for help?
No, that was the black boy.
We have been told by some of those who helped remove the body of the maid that she bore no signs of injury to her body. Having regard to those statements, can you tell us what there was to cause you to think she was dead?
The appearance of her limbs, and she had that pallor attributable to death. And she had not moved from the time she was uncovered, and only her lower limbs were showing.
Was any endeavor made to extricate her at all?
No, there was a good deal of confusion at the time.
Why was no endeavor made to extricate her?
Because I assumed without doubt that she was dead.
I have heard comments he made about me that I shouldn't have said what I said in the Royal Commission. He said that because I was a constable of police and I shouldn't have been talking about my boss like I had. And it didn't really worry me what he said or what he thought. I was only telling the truth, and I thought it was my duty to tell the truth, and that's what I told.
I don't know how long I was in the water, but these fellas were struggling around, and the water was black with oil, the water was burning, and I'd be swimming on my back pulling someone out, and I'd see these Japanese dive bombing, not dive bombing, but strafing coming down at us, and you can see the spurts of water and fetting him. It looked like the bullets was going to go straight through me.
And they were actually machine gunned while they were picking those men up. The men in the water were machine gunned. Now, we had somewhere around about 300 acute casualties on board. And I can remember it was 2 or 3 days intensive operating work, non-stop.
And the doctors worked every minute of the day and night just about with a couple of nurses.
Particularly the naval team under Surgeon Commander Clive James that were in this building, the hospital at Benoit, worked without a break for about 36 hours, the nurses as well afterwards, and did a tremendous job.
It was the small things, I think, showed what I would term as a lot of courage in various people who just carried out doing what they knew how to do, were doing their own thing and looking after people and that sort of business. So I do feel that a lot of people showed a lot of courage.
So, now we know, finally, much of the truth about Darwin. Heavy loss of life on the first day, perhaps as many as 1,000 people dead. Acts of great courage alongside acts of cowardice. Events which conjure up feelings of pride and of shame. But no doubt the greatest shame of all is that we weren't trusted with the full story. That our own government at the time judged the Australian people as lacking the moral fiber to stand up as the people of Europe, America, and Russia did, and rally to protect our homeland in the face of attack. Whatever prompted this decision, they certainly succeeded in keeping the rest of Australia very much in the dark.
We wondered what the people at home would be thinking about this lot. Would they realise that we're in danger? Would they realise there'd been that many people killed? And eventually my dear mother wrote and said that, I believe there's been a raid on Darwin. It was so pleasing to hear that there were so few casualties. I hope it wasn't near you.
Looking back on it, it makes one wonder whether it was deliberate. They didn't want to alarm the rest of the people in Australia.
I don't think there's any doubt that the ministers feared the Australian population would panic if they were told the truth. Officially, the image had been that Darwin was well defended, and to suddenly admit that 243 people had been killed and the town devastated, so much shipping sank, the government must have felt that was too much, and they kept the evidence, the whole thing, quiet until 1945, in fact.
I was told that I wasn't allowed to say anything because it would be detrimental to the country. Well, I was pretty upset, and I was raring to speak to the media and tell them exactly my view, as I'm telling you now. And when I got to Melbourne, I was met by 2 military police. And I gave them my statements, and I had to swear that I wouldn't make them public. Otherwise, I would be incarcerated.
It was wartime, and I think everyone just accepted the fact that there's a lot of censorship. I think we even had our letters censored in those days, even then.
And she said, do you know Darwin was bombed? And then I said, Darwin was bombed? And she said, yes, this morning. And it was Darwin time, 10 o'clock. And they turned and looked at me, I was white.
Were you able to find much news?
No.
What had happened?
And
It's a sad state of affairs, you know, like to know that what the people in Darwin were going through at that time and the people down south were quite ignorant to the fact.
And we've got to remember, everything that happened at Darwin has got to be taken in the context of the fact of the existence of the Brisbane line and the fact that that 7/8 of Australia, and particularly the top end, was considered to be expendable.
20 years of neglect, that's the basic problem by all Australian governments. This blame can't be shared just by the government of the time. It has to go back. And the same sort of thing that you're seeing now in times of peace. Nobody believes there's going to be a war, and nobody is prepared to spend the money to prepare for a war.
As Churchill said, they're prepared to let Australia go when it was attacked.
Darwin survived that first day, and she continued to survive further raids for another 18 months. There were over 100 air raids made on Australia's north coast during that period, and 64 of them were in Darwin. There's so much that we've not told, and perhaps now, if the cloud of shame can be lifted, then many people who were in Darwin will begin to tell their stories, and we can have the strength to recognize with pride those who fought and died in that lonely, distant struggle. We're still a very young country, without a great deal of past. Let's at least take what we've experienced, acknowledge it, and put it to work in our future.